I'm making a retro-style survival horror game based on old Resident Evil and Silent Hill called The Revanchist. Lately I've been running a bit of a behind-the-scenes series where we're going to take a bit of a peek behind the curtain at what's really gone into making this game. And today, we're talking inspirations. I've recently launched the first part of this video where I've talked a little bit about the video game inspirations, but this time we're going to be talking about a few other things from movies to books to songs. Because there is a whole lot more other than games that's gone into inspiring this project, including some pretty personal topics, so stick around, we're going to run you through it. Pull up a seat, roll a J, and enjoy. So starting with movies, we're going to start this off with a bang with Terrified or Aterrados. You have absolutely heard me talk about this one before. I don't know if I'd call it a masterpiece, but it is absolutely one of my personal favorite movies, and one of the only ones that's really scared me. And there's a few things it does that I absolutely love. First off, what I would just call non-Euclidean monsters. The idea that these creatures could be literally anywhere, including spaces that they would not physically fit, or spots that look like there's nothing from where you're standing, is genuinely terrifying. And if you've been following this game recently in particular, you've probably seen a lot of this inspiration starting to pop up. Something else is horror usually spends quite a long time building up and starts very, very slow. One thing I absolutely love about this movie, as well as the next one I'm going to talk about, another film by Demian Rugna, is the pacing. Things pick up right away and don't stop till the movie's done. While it does give you some room to breathe, it doesn't waste a bunch of time getting into it. Now, most older games follow this structure for the gameplay, but I really wanted to dial it in with the story as well. And I plan on taking a lot of inspiration from how this movie paces and tells its story in my own. And finally, there's one particular scene in this movie that has been a huge inspiration in specific. And that's one with this boy sitting at the table. It is a super simple scene with very little actually happening, but it's tremendously viscerally tense and unnerving. And this scene in specific was actually the main direct inspiration for the director's office in The Revanchist. And finally, I love the way this movie kind of blurs the line between life and death. It was something that really grabbed my attention. You can definitely expect to see a little bit of this popping up before too long. And while we're on the work of Demian Rugna, let's quickly knock out a minor inspiration with When Evil Lurks. So by the time this movie came out, The Revanchist was already pretty well figured out, so it didn't have a huge hand in shaping the story. One thing it did shape, however, is how I want to tell that story. Because something that really grabbed my attention in this movie is the fact that everybody knows exactly what's happening. It's a fairly well understood thing, and it's treated as fairly mundane by all the characters in the movie. This is a really interesting approach for horror, since usually fear is built off the unknown. Having everybody in that piece of media know exactly what's going on almost seems counterintuitive. The way it struck me though is that since everyone in the movie already knows what's happening, no one ever really has to explain it to anyone. Therefore, no one ever really explains it to the audience. Because everyone in the movie already so familiar with what's happening, that leaves the viewer almost completely in the dark. And to me, this helps make the story a lot more compelling since you kind of have to read between the lines and connect some dots yourself to figure it out. And it also helps ramp up the horror a bit for the audience. So firstly, I think it could be a really fun challenge for myself, but also I think it's a really great fit for the story. As such, I've made a point of making sure everyone knows as much as they possibly can. The protagonist, John, doesn't know what's going on, but he knows the company gets up to lots of shady things. And everyone writing all the notes you read know exactly what's happening here. Not only that, but this is their job, this is every day for them, so they speak about it like it's fairly normal because whoever they're writing to also knows what's going on. Coming up next, another one of my personal favorites, Return of the Living Dead. Now, I've talked about this one at some length in one of my recent videos, so I'm gonna keep this fairly brief. So to start, this scene at the beginning of the movie, I absolutely love. A big part of it is the sound. Between this half of a dog wailing and the zombie man screaming, it's a tremendously unsettling and intense moment, and is gonna be a huge inspiration for some of the scenes in The Revanchist. Another one that I've got to talk about is the tar zombie. So with the tar zombie, the idea is all of his muscles and tendons are basically melted into goo. As such, when he moves around, he kind of swings and flails in a very unsettling and unnatural way. So recently I've got a more proper rig put together for my zombie enemies, and I'm currently kind of learning animation, and this scene in particular has been a great reference for making some unsettling zombie animations. And finally, this movie nails the whole fate worse than death angle that I'm going for in The Revanchist. I'm gonna give you some minor spoilers for the movie, so if you're considering watching it, I'd say go do so now because it works way better if you go into it just expecting a cheesy 80s zombie movie. So in this movie, the zombies are basically immortal. Even destroying or removing their head won't kill them. Here's the kicker, they're still conscious. As their bodies start to rot and decay, the zombies are still awake and able to feel all of it, and they're completely unable to die. And the only thing they could do to cope with the pain is eat brains, which act as a sort of short-acting painkiller to them. Like, is it just me, or is that a really fucking disturbing premise for such a goofy movie? One thing I want to note here, inspired by does not mean based on. This is not exactly what I'm doing, but this definitely was a huge inspiration behind the story and lore of this game. And now one slightly smaller one, but still worth mentioning, is the Banshee chapter. So I'd be lying if I said I remember too much out of this one, but one thing I do remember is I was salty as fuck when I first watched it. Back then, I was obsessed with every idea I had for this game being totally original, and I had just come up with the idea of adding the numbers station. After watching this, I was getting ready to cut it, because it had already been done in a different piece of media, and that's how ridiculous I was being. But after pondering on it for a while, I realized not everything I did had to be completely unique as long as I use it in a new and interesting way. And that really got me thinking of some interesting things I could do with the numbers station in terms of gameplay and story. It also prompted me to shift quite a bit of lore to differentiate it at least a little bit from the movie, and spawned a lot of ideas that are still in the game today. Next off is Shudder. This is another one I don't remember too much about. What I do remember is the ending, and that's one that stuck with me. Seeing that picture he had taken of himself was a genuinely terrifying moment, especially realizing that's what was going on the entire time. And the final shot of the reflection in the door was just fantastic to me. This movie very heavily inspired the opening to the previous version of this game, though that's been cut, but this was right up there with Fatal Frame and Outlast in terms of inspiring the camera mechanics. Moving on to the next one, we've got Annihilation. Now this movie honestly really didn't do it for me, it just wasn't what I was expecting, but that's not to say I didn't love a lot of what they did. Something that was a huge inspiration for me was the Shimmer, I think they called it. It's a sort of anomalous zone where no signals can pass in or out and where no one who's entered has ever returned. This area is centered around a lighthouse and is starting to rapidly grow as people desperately try to figure out what it is and what to do about it. And while I can't say too much about what specifically that inspired, one thing I can say is the forest. The way it kind of shifts and changes as you move through closer to the R&D 3 building was directly inspired by this movie. Something else I loved was the creatures and the kind of random genetic shuffling that everything within the Shimmer had. I thought it was a really cool idea. It's like a DNA key party. And you can already see a little bit of that poking through with the snake dog I made. Can't imagine that's the last you're gonna see of it either. And after that, we got a couple of smaller movie inspirations as well. We're gonna start things off nice and mid with grave encounters. I absolutely love the scene of the entrance just being gone, and the way the building shifts and changes around him as the movie goes on. This is what originally inspired me to start getting a little bit weird with things like that. Hellraiser is another good one. First of all, again, it captures that whole fate worse than death angle, and it really helped me solidify that idea in my head. But I think it's also going to be a great reference for creature design moving forward. The Cenobites really fit within the design language for my creatures, and they're definitely going to be a great source of inspiration moving forward. I'm also going to throw the Thing in there with that as well. It is an absolute masterclass in creepy critters, and it's going to be a great resource for coming up with gross, disturbing monster designs as this project moves forward. And I'd say that just about covers it for movies. There was a lot of broader inspiration from movies in general and the way I set up lighting, things like decorating the environments, but those aren't generally based on any one movie in particular. Either way, up next is books and stories. I'm going to be keeping this one fairly brief because honestly, I have a really hard time remembering anything out of written works at this point, and most of what these have inspired has been the story and lore of the game, which I can't really spoil, so there isn't too much to say about some of them. Regardless, I think the best place to start here would be with the rats in the walls. This was one of my biggest inspirations behind the story, and while I can't go too deep into it, one thing that really stuck out to me with this story is the intriguing mystery of the cave. Now, it's been a minute, but as far as I remember, the main character inherits a priory and finds a secret passage underneath into a cave system. He sees that the passage was carved outwards from the inside, and deeper in the cave, he finds a sort of underground village full of bones that look vaguely, but not quite human. The cave also keeps going into a complete void of darkness that seems to have something unnatural going on there. And that raised a ton of super compelling questions about what that place even was, who lived there, or why. Unfortunately, I can't talk too much about the story or what it inspired because I don't want to give too much away, but I definitely would suggest reading it if you want to get a little bit of an idea for what the story might have in store. A couple more that I'm going to lump together because they're here for the same reason would be The Jaunt and The Long Dream. Now, I've talked quite a bit recently about the idea of a fate worse than death and that kind of thing, but one thing I really want to explore specifically is the concept of time and eternity. Now, how deep I actually explore these ideas is going to completely come down to my writing skill. I'd rather just leave things unsaid or underdeveloped than throw in a bunch of ham-fisted exposition, so how much of this actually finds its way into the story is going to completely depend on my ability to convey it. But regardless, both of those stories were huge inspirations for me in exploring that subject matter in the first place. It's an idea that I find fascinating and terrifying and has a lot of potential. Another inspiration that I've mentioned before is Enigma of Amigara Fault. Again, I can't really say too much about specifically what this inspired without spoiling things, and I also don't want to talk too much about this story either because it's a really quick read. If you're already familiar, there's not a whole lot else for me to say, and if you're not, go Google it and give it a read through. It's worth it. And frankly, Junji Ito's work as a whole has been a huge inspiration, particularly the way he handles page turns. The man's basically figured out how to do jump scares on paper. And while my horror is generally going to be much less in your face, the way I designed the door opening reveals such as the director's office or the waste disposal room were very specifically and directly inspired by what he does with page turns. And finally, we've got House of Leaves. Once again, there's not a whole lot for me to say here. I don't remember too much specifics about the story, and saying what it inspired would spoil too many things. So I'm just gonna keep it vague and say the non-Euclidean geometry of the house, stuff they did with that, was what inspired me to start going down that direction in the first place. And now we're gonna get into a few miscellaneous ones. The next two I'm gonna talk about in particular were actually two of the biggest inspirations for this game in terms of shaping its overall direction, and I've never talked about them before on this channel. So we're going to be starting off by talking about some music actually. So back in the day, I used to be big into heavy metal. Not so much anymore, but back then, one of my favorite bands was Trivium. Back in 2015, they dropped an album, Sin in the Sentence. At that point, I'd already been kicking around some ideas for this game for about a year or two, but I still didn't have a title. Well, you may notice something familiar in that album. Well, you see, the title here intrigued me enough to go look it up. I'd never heard this word before, but it sounded like an actual word, had a lot of gravitas and presence to it, and almost felt like something I should know. Like, it certainly wasn't gibberish, it must be an actual word or something, and that inspired a lot of intrigue. And as I looked into the meaning of it, I realized it would actually be a perfect title for what I was working on, since the actual meaning fits very, very well. And I also wanted to inspire a similar feeling of mystery or intrigue in potential players who have probably also never heard this word before. Well, after picking the title, I realized there's a lot more I could do with things to make it work on more levels. It already had a lot of kind of metaphorical, symbolic significance, but I had a lot of great ideas to give it a more literal meaning as well in the game. And while plans have changed a lot, and most of that original metaphorical significance is gone, a lot of the things that were changed or added giving it a literal meaning are still there. And even though all the original meaning to it is gone, it still had an amazingly big impact on the development of this game all the way through to this very day. And sticking with the music theme, up next is the single biggest inspiration for the previous version of this game and its overall tone. Once again, even though a lot of it's been cut, it still had tremendous impact on steering the overall direction of this current version of the game. And that would be Locrian's Infinite Dissolution. It's another album that dropped at about the same time when this game was in a very formative state, and if you watch my videos regularly, you'll know I don't plan a lot. I tend to just go by feel and vibes. Well, this album here is what determined the vibe of the previous version of this game. If you want to know what it would have been like, think Resident Evil item management with Ready or Not combat in a Fallout-style post-apocalypse, and then Amnesia the Bunker is just hidden 2/3 of the way through the game. And with that in mind, if you wanted to know exactly how I wanted that game to feel, think about that while looking at some screenshots and listening to tracks like Arc of Extinction, KXL1, The Great Dying, or Heavy Water. Even though this game has changed a lot, and so has my taste in music, I'll still pop this album on from time to time when I'm working on it, just to help me kind of set the tone. And this album in particular has pretty much steered the entire direction of the game for quite some time, and I can guarantee you that things in the Revanchist would look very, very different if I had never listened to it. And frankly, if I had the skills to do so, this would also be a big inspiration behind the soundtrack of the game. Believe me, I've tried. The only places it's actually worked out is the title screen. The main menu music was definitely very heavily inspired by Locrian. And now one last piece of music that is arguably the most important was Rings by Aesop Rock. That's more the kind of music I listen to nowadays. And now I'm gonna be real, this one didn't inspire anything at all in the game, so why is it even here? And certainly why is it the most important? Well, this song is what inspired me to get back into making this game in the first place. So it's a song about losing touch with your creative passions, specifically drawing and painting, but for me that was graphic art and game development.
Imagine a rush that ensue when you get 3 dimensions stuffed in a 2, then it's off to a school where it's all you get to, being trained and observed by a capable few.
So when I restarted this project about 10 months or so ago, I had just lost my job and I was spending all my time just sitting around waiting for the day to end with nothing really to do. By that point, I had completely fallen out of touch with all of my old hobbies, including graphic art and game development. Well, one night I was hitting the za, listening to some music, and something about this song really just hit me. And this is what inspired me to jump back into it. I mean, now felt as good a time as any, and I really had nothing else to do. This was kind of the perfect opportunity for me to reconnect with that kind of thing. It's crazy to think that this whole game, this whole channel spawned out of me getting high and listening to some rap. It's crazy where life takes you. And finally, we've got a couple of more personal, internal inspirations. Now, a lot of people have noticed that this game has a very dreamlike feel, and that is definitely intentional. Especially people who found the secret area. They were really slapped across the face with that. And that's because that area and a lot of this game was frankly inspired by dreams. Just actual literal dreams. Frankly, there have been quite a few spots in the game so far that have really been directly inspired by dreams. Even a couple of sequences that have pretty much been pulled one-to-one. And that's probably going to continue as the game goes on. And finally, I'm going to touch on something a little bit more personal. This is a topic that I kind of want to just keep separated into its own video at some point in the future. Maybe or maybe not I'll actually make that. Either way, I'm going to keep it really quick and simple for now. So in a lot of ways, this game has been a bit of a coping mechanism for me as I fought through some long-term difficulties in life, like complex PTSD and DPDR, among some other things. Now, these issues have gone undiagnosed for basically my entire life until about a month ago. I obviously knew something was wrong, but I didn't understand it at all, and this game was in a lot of ways a way for me to explore my own feelings and emotions. I used it as a chance to take a lot of the emotions and struggles and other abstract concepts that I was kind of grappling with and turn them into something a little bit more tangible so I can hopefully start to understand them a little better myself. Now, as I said previously, I'm not trying to make Silent Hill 2. Mental health is not going to be a real theme in this game and is probably never even going to be mentioned. That's not to say there's no metaphors or symbolism, but it's all meta, a reflection of me as the creator maybe, but not of any of the characters in the game, and everything you see should be taken literally. And that's a big part of why I focus so much on the idea of a fate worse than death, and particularly concepts of time and forever. Because honestly, I'm not scared of death. What scares me is the idea of forever. And I'm really trying to build up my writing skills so I can actually explore this because I do have a lot to say, and this is a theme that genuinely means a lot to me. Because if anything, the idea of death actually brings me a great deal of comfort to know that no matter how bad things get, there is always going to be an ending to it. I've had a tough life, so the idea that one day things are going to be over actually makes it a lot easier to cope with. And that's a big part of why media like Return of the Living Dead, Hellraiser, The Jaunt, The Long Dream really stuck with me as much as they did. And I really do have a story I want to tell here, at least in broad, abstract points. I just have no idea how to actually tell it in detail, which is why I haven't really gotten started on the story in the game yet. But regardless, there we have it. The comprehensive list of all the significant inspirations that have gone into making the Revanchist what it is and what it will be. If hearing about these various inspirations that have gone into this project have piqued your interest, make sure you give me a wish list and stick around to hear where this project goes in the future. But either way, thank you very much for watching and have a fantastic rest of your day.